Welcome back to the program. With us once again is Ken Abramowitz. He is chairman of American Friends of Likud, chairman of NGN Venture Capital, and founder of SaveTheWest.com. Ken, how was your week? Thank you for joining us again.
Okay, it's always hectic and enjoyable at the same time.
And there's always something newsy and something exciting going on. So
that's right.
One of my pet peeves, and I saw it in the paper recently, I'm sure you saw it as well, is UNRWA, United Nations Relief Welfare Association, which was created after the creation of the State of Israel to deal with only one refugee problem, the Palestinian Arab. That's all that they do. And while the United Nations agencies on refugees, the job is to get rid of refugees, so after every conflict you should have less and less refugees. There's one exception with Palestinian Arabs. Not only are they not reducing the numbers, they're increasing the numbers, and they've been, in fact, it's been documented, they fought against Israel in the Six-Day War. They've helped Hamas when they're using during their terrorism, and they're still existing in Palestinian society. Now there's a movement underway where people want to stop funding UNRWA because of what they're doing. Their mandate goes against what the United Nations really stands for, so they're looking to absorb their budget into having a separate budget, absorbing, I believe, into another agency to obscure and make it harder to defund the UNRWA. I think it's an important issue. I want to get your input. I think our government and any government should not be giving a penny to UNRWA.
Yes, well, there's two issues. One is UNRWA is being financed as like a separate unit, and then they want to move it to be funded as part of the bigger pool. So, number one, they should maintain the status quo of keeping UNRWA financed by one separate unit, so to speak, of funding. That's number one. Number two, everyone who's funding that separate unit should stop funding the separate unit. The UNRWA is basically controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood, so which is a terror organization. And so, since the UN allowed a terror organization to take over UNRWA, we know it in Western civilization should be financing it. It's time to close it down and have the regular procedure of the UN. I believe it's the High Commissioner of Refugees, but they have a separate organization that looks at all the refugees other than so-called Palestinian Arab refugees. They should assume responsibility for all refugees all around the world. There shouldn't even be a separate UNRWA.
There shouldn't be, and it's something which I'd love to see Jewish leadership, political leadership deal with, because it's been documented since the course of their history, whether it was 1967, as I mentioned, they're fighting against Israel with UNRWA people, where they're aiding and abetting Hamas to this very day, a shield for them, helping them, protect them, all kinds of matters. A lot of their Hamas people are on the payroll of UNRWA.
Yes, and certainly managing it, either directly or through coercion. And so it's a sad state of affairs. I mean, it's one of the big problems with the UN. Basically, the bad guys took control of the UN. The UN was started by good people, but the good people allowed the bad people to take over. And so this comes into a separate issue, is the UN really shouldn't even exist anymore. The U.S. government should cut off all funding, not just for UNRWA, but also for the UN, and then take that funding, set up a separate United Nations of democracies, perhaps a third of the countries of the world, and have an organization where people, only normal countries can join. Why should we have dictatorships and terror organizations in the UN, and we have to listen to them? I don't want to listen to them, and I don't want to finance them. So it's really, you're getting to the key issue, which is the time has come and gone for the United Nations.
Oh, I agree that the United Nations has outlived its usefulness in certain areas, especially when it comes to Israel. They're so busy and preoccupied with that, they forget about Syria, Iran, some other terrorist groups that exist and killing people on a day-to-day basis. But it's unlikely we're getting rid of the United Nations. However, a group that's perpetuating terrorism and refugees, I'm not even sure why it exists. We're supposed to decrease refugees. Why is it increasing refugees every year?
Yeah, actually, I think President Trump could get rid of the UN. He could cut the funding, keep cutting funding. There's certain funding that's required and certain that's voluntary. He should certainly cut off whatever proportion is voluntary, and then start getting out of the legal entrappings that forced the U.S. government and other governments to legally send money. He'd have to expend political capital on it. And the problem presidents have is there's only so many things they can do at the same time. They just run out of time and they run out of political capital.
Well, by the way, they can't chew gum and think at the same time.
Yeah, but in a perfect world, right? In a perfect world, President Trump would work to close down the UN. But remember, he's got a lot of things on his plate.
Are you happy the way things are going now? Before I let you go with the administration, with it seems like people coming and going, it's free for all.
Yes. Well, the way I look at it is there's three factions within the administration. I'll just guess, 50% of the people surrounding President Trump are real Republicans. 25% are Republicans in name only, affectionately called rhinos, and 25% are Democrats. And I think he purposely wants it that way, because I think he wants input from those three different factions. The trouble is the three factions are always fighting with each other, as you would expect. I think the big fight now is over the national security head, General McMaster, who seems to have historical ties with Iran and historical ties with the Muslim Brotherhood and with Saudi Arabia. And I think he thinks the fight is just with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and he's not up to the task of taking on Iran and North Korea and Venezuela. They're all interrelated. Taking on the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Turkey and Qatar, half friends, half enemies, and taking on the Saudis, or the Wahhabis, financed by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, who are half friends, half enemies. I just don't think he's up to the challenge of contending with the four political Islam terror organizations. I think we need a much stronger national security head.
Ken Abramowitz, chairman of American Friends Likud, chairman of NGN Venture Capital, founder of SaveTheWest.com. I look forward to our continued conversation next week.
Great. Nice talking as always.
Likewise, and we're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned.